Welcome to a special Galileo Capital update. We decided that it was time for Theo and I to have a conversation for you about what's gone on in South Africa in the last weeks, with these riots and the looting. And it's been a situation that's deeply distressing for every South African, and certainly not something that one should take lightly. I think it's something that brought back some real flashbacks for a lot of older South Africans to kind of the apartheid era, and then for younger South Africans who are grappling with the impact of a pandemic, suddenly to be faced with across the country the broad scale of violence and unrest and looting has been something that few South Africans would have been able to tolerate without a huge sense of discomfort. And so we thought it was the right time to talk about this and to give our views, and certainly not to make predictions, but just to give as much context as we can to what's gone on, and certainly what our thoughts are on the future. So Theo, I think perhaps you could just give a bit of background as to how did we get here.
Well, Warren, yes, I think again I want to just emphasize what you say. This is uncomfortable for every single one of us. And I think the last time we had this kind of uncomfortability was probably with the assassination of Chris Hani. And just as we were starting to get the process of the New South Africa going, that had the opportunity to derail the whole project. It didn't. South Africans came together, we pulled through. And I think if you look last week and probably the beginning of this week, we probably saw the worst of South African behavior. And I think that's what shocked everybody. But we also saw some of the best South African behavior from the people that tried to take control of where they live in their societies. I think one of the difficulties is to pinpoint a specific reason for that. And one must be very careful. This is going to be a complex set of circumstances that led to this. There's the one view that said this is purely a family feud within the ANC. There's some truth to that, but it's simplification. There's people that say this is primarily the ethnic support of Jacob Zuma. Might be some truth in that, but again, it's only part of the situation. Then there's clear signs that this was planned, this was orchestrated. Yes, there's some truth to that as well. But underlying all of this is a challenge we face in South Africa. During the 9 wasted years, as it's called, specifically the second half of the Zuma administration, not only did unemployment increase, but the per capita income of South Africans decreased, and this relationship between the haves and the have-nots simply widened. So you have a lot more people that is unemployed, that's structurally unemployed, that actually haven't had a job for not for a year, but for 2 or 3 years. And that one needs to question, are they employable? And that is part of a frustration, because if you look at most of these looters were males, younger than 30-year-old, in that bracket of the demographic, which has got no real future in this country. And one needs to appreciate that. So that's some of the reasons, but be very careful to make judgment calls as to say, fix this or fix that. And then obviously we had the state security infrastructure or intelligence infrastructure just hopelessly not able to predict this in a proper way. Yes, there might have been some predictions, but there's always these predictions, but they did not get that right. So that was a major fault on the state side. The reaction of the state was extremely slow. I think one needs to realize that when these things get moving, in this case, it was absolutely underestimated. I also think there were some major intelligence mistakes made. But the point is, we saw South Africans come together in a way that South Africans usually come together, in the way they came together after the Chris Hani assassination, in the way they came together when things are really tough. And I think that's what we should take from this. But that doesn't mean that this was a wake-up call for South Africa, that we need to address certain structural issues in this economy. Luckily, we have time. And with that, I mean, this is not the Arab Spring where the whole thing will fall over. This is a warning shot to say, guys, this can happen. Let's try to fix it, and let's try to emphasize some of the elements.
Theo, I think it's a powerful point that we've been debating and discussing inequality in South Africa for a very long time. And for a lot of South Africans who are economically in a stable position, they don't necessarily feel or haven't felt this as a pressing, urgent thing that needs to be addressed. It's for a lot of people, it's felt almost like an academic concept. It's something happening out there, but it's not happening inside, the safety zone or the bubble. And I think that one real impact of this looting and these riots has been people have suddenly realized that the academic concept is not a concept. It's a day-to-day reality for many. And the most dangerous kind of a person is someone who has nothing and has no hope. And that's the reality that we have. Is there are a lot of people in South Africa who feel no hope. And so the moment you remove their hope, all the options are on the table for them. And so I think that it's something we shouldn't underestimate. Those of us that have some means and that have the ability to buy food and to kind of look after our families, etc. That there are a large part of South Africans' population that really do worry about how they're going to get food tomorrow. And kind of postponing the debate and taking our time to resolve the issues is not our best course of action. We do need to take some action. And so I think, I'd like to jump on to the next part of this, which is about the future. But just for a few seconds, just to say, that, again, while we're talking about this, it's not that we're sitting here, not aware of some very real damage and people who've lost their lives in this kind of a situation. I guess it's always our job, in our business and with our clients to provide context and to understand as much as we can about what has happened, what we think is going on, and the options that we have going forward. But we're in no way diminishing that. There are a lot of people that are really rattled and really afraid, and that's on top of what we've already seen with the COVID pandemic and the lockdown. So we're certainly not sitting in ivory towers, trying to kind of position academic arguments and theoretical debate. These are real issues. Our staff are affected, we're affected, our families are affected. And so in that context, my next question to you is, what flows from this? Where do we go from here?
Look, I think there's going to be a few avenues that needs to be addressed. And I just want to take on one of the points that you said. We also always talk about the matric results. That percentage passed and that percentage failed. And then we wonder what we're going to do with those, or how we're going to accommodate the people that fail matric. But what we forget is the biggest problem is those people that start school and never get to matric. They are a much bigger problem than those people that got to matric and either failed or passed. There's a massive amount, there's hundreds of thousands of kids every year that start school and somewhere in the system, they disappear. And the problem is those people have been disappearing now for probably a decade or so. And that's part of their problem. Now, I think there's going to be probably a few things coming out of this. And I'm very hesitant to make predictions because we'll only get proper analysis as the weeks go by. But I do think something that's going to become very much a topical issue is a universal basic income grant, a specific amount of money that every South African will get every month that will try to take the edge of this. And there's various models. I have to stress, there's an incredible amount of research that's already being done on this. So don't think it's just something that comes out of the blue. It is a topic that we're seeing more and more internationally. And unfortunately, with our massive unemployment, people that simply cannot find a way to survive, I think this is something that will come onto the table. And we're talking about something like 550 or 600 Rand a month. It's going to be extremely expensive. We'll have to find a way to fund it. But that might just be the price to take some of this risk off the table. So the debate on a universal basic income grant will become much more prevalent. And there is academic research on it. And we will have to start to take it seriously. So expect that debate. Remember already 18 million grants is paid every month. That is to roughly 14 million people. And if you add the civil servants to it, about 21 million people needs to live off the taxes that me and you pay. So that debate is going to come to the fore. The second debate is Sydney Mufamadi's report on the State Security Agency was published early in 2019. That's 2.5 years ago. In that report, it specifically stressed that the state security agencies, intelligence services, is hopelessly wrong in terms of its mandate and in terms of the staffing. I think that report will have to be taken seriously. So we need to be able to predict these things. We need to be able to act sooner, and we need to be able to resolve it. And then thirdly, in the long run, our solution is a growing economy. And one hopes that this is the trigger that government realizes that private capital and the private sector needs to be part of the solution. Remember, if you look at the last number of years, capital expenditure came from the private sector, not the public sector. And I think government will need to realize that if they want to get this economy growing, if they want to start to address unemployment, if they want to start to address the social inequalities, a growing economy is simply, it's easier to do these things when the economy is growing. And for that, we'll need that partnership. So I believe we're probably going to see the debate on the basic income grant. We're going to see a revamping of the state security entities, and we're going to see a renewed focus on how do we get inclusive growth. But that's the broader setup, and that's the broader political environment. Warren, let's go now to the real issues around here in terms of our advice to clients, structure of our client portfolios, our investment methodology. This is a time where these things are tested, and I'd like your comment on how are we positioned and what's our recommendations.
So I think for some context, I've been listening to a range of South Africa's bigger fund managers and trying to gauge their responses. What are they doing? How are they positioning their portfolios? I've been on a number of phone calls to them just to get a sense of what they're doing. At the same time, they're talking to the companies that they analyze, so listed companies on the JSE, trying to understand what are the CEOs thinking, what are they doing. And what's interesting to me is that I haven't yet seen a wholesale change from those fund managers where they're dramatically altering their overall investment thesis for South Africa, whether it was good or bad before the time. What's happened now hasn't changed their outlook. For a lot of them, they would view this as a negative, a shock, but certainly a shock to the system. And so the thing to understand when an investor looks at a shock, they don't look at it as a structural change to the whole future of the economy. It's certainly an event which can be understood, absorbed, digested, and then moved on from. And the caveat to that will be that we need to see the violence not flare up again. That we need to see that this really is a once-off, isolated event that gets dealt with correctly and moved on from. So in that context, as a business, as Galileo Capital, we're certainly not looking at this to say, let's fundamentally change our outlook on South Africa, our outlook on offshore, and our way of investing. So in that context, we have been saying for a number of years now that it's critical that you get an offshore allocation that's correct for you and for your financial position, and that you do that when the rand is stronger than 15.50 Rand to the dollar. And certainly from our perspective, we're not changing that view. So if you have an under allocation to overseas assets, understand that when the rand is at 14.50 Rand or 14.70 Rand, we still think it's a good time for you to get your offshore allocation right. Having said that, if you've got the right allocation, so for a lot of people, we're saying, perhaps 50-50 is the right allocation to local or offshore, or 75% offshore if you have intergenerational wealth. We're not now saying go from 75% to 95%. We're maintaining the allocation bands, but we are urging our clients to make sure they have got the correct allocation and to look at that seriously. And I think that's probably, so to say that the situation in our minds is unchanged, that's true, although the risks of a weakening rand are certainly heightened. I think it would be silly to think that any change in the global situation would have no change in South Africa. I think the risks are further exaggerated and further highlighted for both South African investors and overseas investors. And so for me, looking at our business and our clients, certainly to say, the rand it hasn't collapsed as a result of the violence, and big movements in the rand so far have been driven by global investors either becoming pessimistic or optimistic about the way that COVID's working and about inflation, especially in America. So those big trends are certainly overriding what's going on in SA at the moment. But when that news flow quietens down, there will be a renewed focus on South Africa. And ideally hope that, that what's happened in the country in the last few days and weeks gives further impetus to our president to accelerate his economic reforms. We shouldn't lose sight of the fact that the energy market in South Africa is being deregulated at a pace. We shouldn't lose sight of the fact that SAA is going to be privatized, whether we call it privatization or not. We need to see the acceleration of the Transnet unbundling, where we bring in private capital, as you say, and in many other spheres of government or in the economic life of the country, we need to see those reforms being sped up. And I'm hoping that what happens now gives the president and the economic cluster a huge amount of impetus to really just get going, to understand that they have no more time to dilly-dally in the situation. Having said that, if I look at the listed sector, listening to the listed companies, especially the retailers, the number of stores that they've had that have been damaged or lost doesn't amount to more than about 5% across the board. There are some companies that have had more and some that have had less, but as an average, it's about 5% of the stores of the listed companies in South Africa have been destroyed. So some of them have, especially Massmart, have had big damage to their distribution hubs, and certainly those will need to be repaired. But to a large extent, what we have seen, which is remarkable, is the resilience of the logistics chain in South Africa, where listed companies have been able to adapt their entire food distribution process very quickly to be able to cater for any of the damage that has been done. And certainly it's really heartening to see that the food security in South Africa can withstand quite a serious shock to the system, and hopefully that moves on from here, and we allow government allows business to carry on developing that resilience further. And again, the importance of the agricultural sector cannot be understated here. The fact that we have more than enough wheat supplies, and the fact that we have more than enough maize supplies, is critical to why we can get through what was a really shocking collapse of our main arterial network between Durban and Johannesburg. And so certainly that resilience needs to be strengthened and boosted further. So all told, I think we had an awful time, all of us as South Africans, in the last few weeks, on top of an awful time because of the pandemic. And so the positive comments that we're making, both of us, you and I, is to provide some context that it's not all doom and gloom, but that doesn't diminish what has happened. I think I'm conscious that we're recording this the day after we've hit more than 220,000 vaccinations, and that's something that yes, it should have happened much faster, but it has happened, and certainly that vaccination drive is speeding up all the time. And so, if we get the economic reforms accelerated, we do the vaccinations at this pace and faster, there is a lot to be hopeful for. And so I think on that note, from my perspective, we are watching very carefully. We will adapt our calls very, very quickly if we need to. But for now, we're watching. We're not panicking. Yes, our hearts were in our throat, and a lot of us were deeply worried. But certainly the knee-jerk reactions we think should be avoided for now. And we do emphasize, get your overseas and local allocations right. Get your asset allocations right. Make sure you've got the diversification. And we'll keep you informed as we go.
Thanks, Warren. I think that is sound advice, and I just want to stress that don't make emotional decisions based on these events. Rather stick to the long-term rational plan and make sure your overseas exposure is in line with what we believe you should have. And lastly, just before we close off, remember one other point that we must never forget is this was, to a large extent, KZN based and certain areas of Gauteng. Yes, it is bad and we should not underestimate it, but it did not spread. So whoever wanted to instigate this, certainly they created havoc. They created, unfortunately, quite a number of people dying, uncertainty, panic, but they could not get it out of KZN and out of parts of Gauteng, which I also think we just need to recognize. Warren, thank you very much. Again, you are welcome to contact us, contact your advisor, or contact me and Warren. We'll be happily share our views with you and to discuss it with you. And we wish you all the best, and we wish that these kind of things will not happen in future again. If it happens, we will again look at it and we will review our position.